What's going on, everybody? Thanks for tuning back in. Today, we're going to be taking a look at how to take advantage of a cool library called Firebase. Firebase is designed by Google, and it offers a lot of cool services, one of them being authentication and allowing you to authenticate with different social media and providers. This project could be a very good base for you to learn how to use React, Firebase, and Typescript together, while also allowing you to make it very, very easy to integrate different social media logins, even though I'm only showing you the Google one today. I will set you up for success so you can add other ones in the future with relative ease. That being said, we're going to get into it by starting with the Firebase console. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to click Add Project. Enter a project named. I'm just going to say Testing, and I'm going to hit Continue. Since we're just developing an application, you don't have to enable these Google Analytics. You can always do it later. And then you can hit Create Project. Now it's going to go ahead and do everything behind the scenes, create the project for you, and then I'll show you quickly how to enable authentication and some further steps you should take. Now it says your new project is ready. Let's hit Continue. And then over here, let's go to Authentication. Now you're going to get a screen like this. You can go ahead and hit the Get Started. And now your authentication is enabled. So on this sign-in providers, we're going to go ahead and click the email password, and we're going to enable. And we're going to do the same thing for Google. The reason why we're only doing Google for now is because we're going to be creating something with relative ease. Other social media providers are going to ask you to create some stuff on their developer consoles, and we're not going to get into that today. But you can see these are all the options you can log in with, which include Facebook, Twitter, Microsoft, and many, many more. So let's go ahead and click this templates right here after you've enabled your Google and your email address and password. And you're going to see this password reset page. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to change this link to whatever your reset password page is. So in our case, I'm going to be changing this to my localhost, and then I'm just going to have my reset password page as /reset. And then after that, it'll add the rest of the OOB code and actions that you need after. Now, there is one more thing we have to do before we can actually use Firebase for authentication. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to click the project overview and project settings. Down here, you actually have to add an app to the project. So I'm just going to give it the name of testing. You can click this now or click it later if you want to use Firebase hosting, and I'm just going to go ahead and click Register App. And then you're going to get a little object like this right here. You're going to need to save this for the React configuration. So if I continue to my console, what you're going to see is that actually now in my general settings below, you're going to see all the API stuff that you need here. So make sure to save that information. So if you download the sample project, what you're going to see is you're going to see a couple folders here. You're going to see components, config, interfaces, and pages. And inside the pages, you're going to see a couple auth pages. The reason that I've created these for you already is because I've done tutorials already where I actually design out a React starter project like this. So it's not really necessary to code over and over again. So how this works is the application is your entry point. And then inside this routes file, you're going to have a bunch of different pages defined. Those pages are all going to come from your pages folder. You're going to have your home page, which will be protected by Firebase. And then you're going to have these different auth pages. You're going to have a reset, a register, a logout, a login, forgot, and change. And that reset page was the one I mentioned in the Firebase console. And as far as the config goes and the interfaces go, all of this stuff is just basic starter points so that you have a project to work with. If you're going to be, you can still use this tutorial to integrate Firebase into your own project, but I do provide this for you in the GitHub if you did want to start out without coding everything from scratch. That being said, let's get into it. The first thing we're going to create is our Firebase configuration file. So let's go ahead and create a new file inside of our config folder and name it firebase.ts. First, we're going to make sure that Firebase is installed with an npm install Firebase. Firebase automatically comes with all of its type definitions, so you don't need to install any types for it. At the top of the file, we're going to go ahead and import Firebase from Firebase /app. Next, we're going to import just Firebase /auth. And then after that, you can go ahead and import other things you may need from Firebase when you're not doing just authentication. For example, the Firestore, like I do here. We're not actually going to be using this, but this is just an example. And then we're going to go ahead and import our config from our config file. And that's that for the imports. Now, inside the config file itself, you're going to see this little Firebase key here that I already have. Inside of this is where you're going to be copy and pasting the authentication keys, the API keys, all of the JavaScript variables you're going to need. And you're going to be copying them from that page we saw earlier in the authentication section of the Firebase console. You're going to paste those keys right in here. And the reason that we do this is so that we can just directly import them when we create our Firebase object. So go ahead and create a const Firebase, and we're going to make that equal to firebase.initializeApp, and we're going to pass in our config.firebase object. We're going to export our providers for any social media logins we're going to want. I'll be using a Google key here, and that's going to be equal to a new firebase.auth.googleauth provider. And for other social medias, you would do the same thing here, but I'm just going to be using Google for this example. Then you're going to export an auth object, which is equal to the Firebase auth function. We're going to be using this specific auth variable in all of our Firebase commands. And then you're going to export the Firebase object at the bottom of the file. So that's all we need for our configuration. Now it's time to work on our first page. Let's start off with the register page. So as you can see from the starting project I just have a page here as a placeholder, but it doesn't have any real information in it. It just has a paragraph saying what it is. So we're going to start off by adding a couple state variables at the top. So the first one is going to be a registering with its setter function called setRegistering, and that's going to be a bool, and that's going to be starting off with the value of false. And then we're going to have a couple string variables. So the variables that we're going to need for states are email, password, confirm, and error. They're all going to be useState strings. They're all going to start with empty strings, and they're all going to have their own unique setter functions. So let's go ahead and create those. Once you're done creating your variables for your state, you're going to create another object called const history. And this is going to be equal to the useHistory callback from React Router DOM. This will allow us to change the page with the command rather than returning a redirect. Next, we're actually going to create the registering function. So let's create a const sign up with email and password. This function doesn't have to be async because I won't be using a try catch block. I'm just going to be doing it with the standard promise then and catch. Inside of it, you can do some error checking if you want. Right here, you're going to see that if the error isn't equal to empty when I'm starting this function, set the error to empty so that any new errors that pop up won't override the old ones. I'm going to set registering equal to true. Then I'm going to call a Firebase function here. So I'm going to type in auth, and you should see in Visual Studio Code the import for the auth object we created in our Firebase config. If you don't, just import it manually at the top. And I'm going to do an auth.createUser with email and password. And I'm going to return a then block inside a result prop passing to a function and a catch block with an error prop passing to a function. At the top here, I can just check to see if the password and the confirm password for our registration are the same. If not, let's throw a little error here. And any other error checking you want to do, like making sure the email is a valid email or things like that, you can put at the top here. But just to save some time, I'm not going to be doing that because I will show you actually how to catch some of these Firebase errors. And all of the errors that we're going to catch are documented. After our logging.info, the result, we're going to add a history.push to login so that if we are successful in creating a user, we're going to get redirected right to the login page. Inside of our catch block, we can log the error as well, just like we logged the result. Make sure that you use a logging.error if you're following my example, or you could just do a console.log if you don't have a logging library. So inside of the catch block here, you're going to see me type out a couple error code checks. Basically, Firebase, when it returns errors, it has some very specific ones when you log those errors to the console. To save time, again, I'm just going to show you some of them on the registration file. I'm not going to do them in any other ones, but this is how you would do it. So you can check to see if your error.code includes, and then they'll have specific error messages for you. So for example, if you have a weak password, enter a stronger password. If the email is already in use, it's going to throw an error saying, your email is already in use, the one that you're trying to register with. So this is just one way you can give some feedback to the user if you don't want to return the error itself. And then finally, in the end of the catch block, I'm going to set registering equal to false, because if the registration failed, I'm just going to set everything back to the way it was. And the reason we don't set registering false after our history.push login is because you can't really set a state of a page after you leave it. So when we push to the login page, we really don't care what that state is anymore. Now that we have this function created, we're actually going to be creating the input now. So as I mentioned before, I have an auth container already set up for this. So all of my formatting and everything's going to be done nicely for me. But if you don't, you can just use a card from Bootstrap or something from Material UI or whatever visual UI library you're using. So I'm going to start by importing my auth container. Inside of my header, I'm going to pass in what page I'm on here. I'm just going to say the register page. Inside of it, I'm going to add a foreign group. And inside of that, I'm going to add an input. I'm going to have an input for 3 variables here, for my email, for my password, and for my confirm. All 3 of these are going to look very similar, except for a few notable exceptions where the type on my email input is going to be of type email, but the type on my other 2 inputs are going to be of type password. When we put in all our information, the on change for each is going to be different as well. The first one's going to be set email, then we're going to have set password and set confirm. And we're going to make sure that the value is equal to email here, and then the values for the next 2 will be password and confirm as well. So I'm going to copy and paste this, and I'm going to change this to password now. I'm going to change the name to password, ID to password, placeholder, enter password, and set password for my onChange event. My value is password. And I'm going to add one more field here, and I'm going to set my autocomplete equal to new password. That's so it doesn't try and enter anything new into the form for me or give me any suggestions. It's just so you can type your password without having a drop-down menu pop up. I'm going to copy and paste this one actually because it has all my settings already, and just change this one for my confirm variable. Once I'm finished with this, I can then add a button that allows us to register. So I'm just going to stylize this button a little bit, and I make sure I import it from my React strap. I want this button to be disabled when I'm registering, so I'm going to make my disabled equal to registering. I'm going to make my color success. I'm going to make the button a block button so it goes across my whole card. And I'm going to make my onClick equal to the function sign up with email and password. I'm going to give the button some text, maybe sign up. Now after the button, I'm going to add some small text here, and I'm just going to give it a little paragraph here, maybe give it a margin and center the text. And all I'm going to say here is if you already have an account, let's just go ahead and transfer you to the login page. And how you're going to do that is instead of using a attribute with an href, let's go ahead and just use a link from React Router DOM so it keeps you inside of the application. And you're going to have that link go to the login page, like so. After this text, I want to actually display any error text if I have it. So in order to do that, I'm going to actually create a little component that renders text, much like that already have an account. And I'm going to call it error text. And the purpose of this is just to display error text if there is any, and display it, make it red using text danger from Bootstrap. And I'm going to just reuse this component across all of my authentication pages. So inside my props, I'm going to change the error to a string. I'm going to rename what the props are, copy and paste the name, replace the name auth container with error text. I'm going to add the error text here, and I'm actually going to add that into my props as well. I'm going to add a class name to this small attribute, and what I'm going to be passing in is text danger because I want it to appear red. And then I'm going to have a quick check here to say that if my error text is equal to a empty string, just return null. I don't want anything to appear up here. And then I'll just get rid of those exports I copied from the other file. And now I'm just going to type error text here. It should show up in Visual Studio Code, pass in my error, and then close off my object. Now that I finished the registration page, I have to add it to my routes. So as I mentioned before, in my sample project here, I defined my routes in a single file and then map them into my application. But if you defined all your routes manually, that's fine too. So you're going to want to add a route for this page. I'll show you how I do it though. So I'm actually going to go to my routes.ts file, and I'm going to copy and paste this page I already have here for home. And I'm going to enter a path for register. I'm going to change my component to my register page. Just change the name, and I'm going to have a protected equal to false, because when I do actually define my auth routes, I don't want this page to be blocked. I want somebody who's not authenticated to be able to reach it, as opposed to my home page where people can't reach it if they're not logged in. So we will get to that component later in the video. Now it's time to test the page. So let's run an npm start. And when our register page pops up, I'm going to go ahead and enter an email here. Just throw one in. Now I'm going to enter a password that's not strong, and you can see that Firebase is already returning that error for me. It's one of the ones we defined. So I'm going to go ahead and enter a strong password here and see if it redirects me to login. It signed me up and redirected me to login. Obviously nothing renders because we haven't defined it yet, and that means our registration is working properly. Now that we've created the registration page, let's move on to the login page. I'm going to copy everything in my register page, and I'm going to copy it over to this login page I have as a placeholder. And I'm going to make sure to replace all instances of register with login so that the page has its own outputted definition. I'm going to get rid of the confirm. I'm going to get rid of the sign up with email address function. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the new password form, the part that says confirm. I don't need that. Just do a little bit of error cleanup here. And then at the top, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new function, and I'm going to call it sign in with email and password. Inside this function, again, I'm going to check to see if there's an existing error, and if there is, I'm going to set it equal to nothing. I'm going to rename my registering bool to authenticating. You could do this to authenticating, signing in, whatever you want to name it. Inside of my function, I'm going to set authenticating equal to true. And then much like I did, in the last file, I'm going to take auth, and I'm going to call a function called sign in with email and password, pass in my email and password, and then add my then and catch blocks respectively. Again, I'm going to have a result and error prop for each. Inside of my then, I'm going to log my result. And if we're logged in, I'm going to history.push us to the main page. Inside of the error block, I'm going to go ahead and log the error, and then I'm going to set an error here after I set my authenticating to false. Now here you could set the error to error.message, you could have a custom message, or you could check for specific errors like we did in the last one. For now, I'm just going to say unable to sign in. Please try again later. In my auth container, I'm going to go ahead and change my header from register to something like login. Inside of my button, I'm going to change it to authenticating for the disabled. I'm going to change sign up to login. Inside of my small text, I'm going to say instead, if you don't have an account, why don't you register, and change the link to the register page. I don't actually have to do anything to the error text because I'm reusing the component from before. And then inside of my button, I'm going to go ahead and call my function that I've created with my onClick. I'm not going to pass in the event props because I don't need them. And I'm just going to say sign in with email and password as a function here. Now that we've done that, it's time to test the login page. So let's go ahead and do that. But before we do that, we actually have to add our login page to our routes as well. So I'm going to do that by copy and pasting the register route and just changing register to login in all places. I'm going to keep protected here false as well. Now I'm going to start it up and let's see what happens. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my login page, and I'm going to log in with the same email and address I signed up with before. And if it works, it should redirect us here to the home page. Now, it should be noted that I can see the home page no matter what because I haven't protected it yet with my AuthRoute, but the redirection is working and the sign-in is working, as you guys can see. So now that that's working, let's go ahead and actually define an AuthRoute. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to create a new component. I'm going to call it AuthRoute. I'm going to copy my error text index file here because it'll be a lot easier to edit. And inside of it, I'm going to change all instances of error text to AuthRoute. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the props because I don't actually have any, but I will leave the definition here in case I ever want to change it in the future. I'm going to define the children inside the props. And inside the return, I'm going to pass in the children inside of a div. I'm going to get rid of that error check. Now inside here, I'm going to call that auth component that we defined in Firebase, and I'm going to call auth.currentUser, but with a negation in front. And what this is actually doing is asking if the user isn't signed in right now inside of the Firebase object, we're going to go ahead and just redirect to the login page using React Router DOM's redirect component. And once you close it off, just like that, we now have an auth route. So in order to implement this, we're going to go to my application file and we're going to start changing how routes are defined. So again, this is how I'm defining it. If you don't define it this way, you're just going to have to make sure that any protected routes have the auth component in front of them. How I'm going to check this to see if my route is protected, I'm going to go ahead and return basically the same thing, my route.component, but I'm going to pass in my auth route in front to protect it. Again, if you're defining them one by one, you just have to make sure that each definition you have of each route has this auth route in front of the render component. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And right before we test it, if you actually want to see what's going on here, let's go back to the auth route and we'll just add a little logging function. And what you can say inside the logging function is, I'll put a logging.warn here and just say no user detected, redirecting. Now that I have a little bit of logging to see what's going on, I'll start this up again. And let's bring up our login page. Now, I'm going to go ahead and log in to show you what happens. And you can see now that I'm logged in. But if I refresh the page, refreshing the page will kick you out of the app. And since I'm not checking for stored credentials, you'll see that I couldn't refresh back to the main page because no user was found. So it just automatically redirected me to the login page. So now that we can see our routes are actually protected against people who aren't authenticated. Now that we've protected our routes, let's go ahead and learn how to change the password for somebody that's already signed up. To begin our change password page, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste everything from my login page, and I'm going to paste it inside of the change page. I'm going to change all instances of login page to change password page. I'm going to change authenticating to a variable called changing. I'm going to get rid of my email variable and I'm going to create some placeholders here. I'm going to create an old and set old for a string and a confirm and set confirm. So the old variable is going to house our old password and our confirm and password are going to be for the new password variables. I'm just going to change this function name to password change request. And I'm going to change this variable to set changing. I'm going to change the function I'm calling for my Firebase auth to current user if defined, update password, and then pass in the new password. I'm going to set the logging info to password change successful. Get rid of my result prop because we don't really need it. Keep the history.push to the main page. And then set my error to unable to change password. Or in this case, you could do something like error.message to see the actual error in action. Before we render the page, we're going to make sure that we're actually supposed to be here. And what I mean by that is we're checking to see if our provider ID is a password, because if it's anything like a Google login or logging in with Twitter, we don't want to be able to access this page. So we're just going to put a little check in here by checking our auth.currentUser the provider data at index 0 and making sure that provider ID is equal to password, because if it's not, we don't want to be here. That being said, now let's go inside of our auth container and you can go ahead and start changing all of these input variables to what they need to be. We need 3 of them. We need our old password with the value being old, our password, and our confirm. So all 3 of these are going to be password fields. That's all going to share the same type. They're all going to have the autocomplete new password, and they're all going to have their own setter functions installed. So let's go ahead and do that for all 3 of them. Once we do that, change the disabled on this button to changing. Change the on click to the function we have named, which is password change request. Change login to change password. And right here, you can put another error check saying that if the password is not equal to confirm, we're going to set a little error here or return it. If you just want to be precise as well, you can go back to the register page and actually do the same thing by adding return after. Otherwise, it's still going to go through. At the bottom, we can go ahead and get rid of the text for the login page because we don't need that anymore. And then inside of our routes, we can add a route for our change password page. The only difference for this one is that the protected is actually going to be true. And before we forget, let's actually go inside of our protected homepage here and add a little link to say, if you want to change your password, you can go right ahead and click this little link right here that we're putting in. And we're going to make the link called change. And now when you get to this password, it's going to redirect you to the change password page. So we want to put that in just to make sure that we can actually click it without exiting the application. Because if you type it into the URL address bar, it's going to refresh the app and you won't be logged in anymore. So let's log in. And what we should see here happen is we're going to log in, and when we hit the change password page, it's still going to render the login page because we haven't changed the component yet. But we just want to make sure that everything is working as far as the link goes. So let's log in. And when we click the change password, okay, we're on the right page. So now let's go back and just change our component inside of our routes file to that change password page we just created. And when we run this back up and refresh, we're on the change password page. You can go ahead and try and change your password. Make sure it's still a strong password. And if you click change, we'll see a little console log saying password change successful, and it redirects you back to the login page. So everything is working fine for our change password page. Again, you don't want to use this page if you're signing up with a social media login like Twitter or Google. And Firebase provides a lot of them. For example, Microsoft, GitHub. The possibilities are endless. So make sure that you're only using the change password page for people that have signed up with an email and password. So we have 3 out of our 6 pages defined. Let's go ahead and just create a simple logout page. For the logout page, I'm just going to work with the placeholder that we already have because this page isn't too complicated. So I'm going to start by putting in an auth container with the header logout. I'm going to add a little paragraph here saying, are you sure you want to log out with a question mark? And that's because we're going to make it appear just like a little modal in the middle of the page. I'm going to center the text. And then the next thing I'm going to do is add a little div here for our buttons. And I'll just pass in the text center because Bootstrap will automatically center the buttons for us. I'm going to insert 2 buttons from React Strap. And this button, the first one, is going to have a color danger. Its class name is going to be having an MR of -2, which means I want a margin on the right of 2. I'm going to put an on-click placeholder for now. Copy and paste it for the second button. This button's color I'm going to change to info because I want it to appear blue. I'm going to name the first one cancel and name the second one logout. Next, I'm going to create that history object that we've been using in every other page by getting the use history from React Router DOM. I'm next going to create a logout function where I'm going to call auth.signout, which also is a promise, so you have to add a then and catch block as well. For the then block, I'm just going to do a history.push to log in, because now that we're logged out, you can just send the user back to the login page. Even if you sent them to a different page, it's still going to redirect them there, so you might as well just do it here. And inside the catch block, I'm just going to go ahead and log the error, because if there's an error, we don't want to do anything necessarily. We just want to see what the error is for now. There really shouldn't be signing out the user, so this is really all the checking you need to do here. Inside of the cancel button, you have two options, and that is either a history.push to a specific page or a history.goback to the previous page you were on. For the logout button, I'm just going to call the logout function, and then our logout page is finished. Let's go ahead and add our logout page to our routes, and we're going to make the path logout. We're going to change the component, change the name, and this one will also be protected as users who aren't signed in have no business logging out. Before we test the logout page, let's go ahead and go to our application and add a link to the logout. Otherwise, when you go to the logout route, it's going to go ahead and boot you out of the application and it won't be signed in anyways. So we're going to add it underneath like we've been doing before. You could just have a little click to logout message like I'm putting here. You can have a button, whatever you want, as long as the link goes to logout. So I'm going to save that, and then now we can run an npm start to test. Now log in with whatever user you've created and go ahead and go to the main page, and you should see that click to logout function that you've already made. Go ahead and click it, and it should bring you to this logout page. Now, if you hit cancel, it's just going to send you back. And if you hit logout, it's going to boot you out of the application. So the next thing we're going to want to do is actually save our user state, or actually check to see if a user state is saved. Normally, when you're using different types of authentication that aren't Firebase, you save the tokens in local storage or in a cookie, and then anytime the user reloads the application, you check to see if they're authenticated. So Firebase actually provides us a way to see if we're already logged in or not, because refreshing the page every time and forcing you to log in is going to get really annoying really fast. So we're going to use a built-in Firebase mechanism to actually check to see if our state is saved. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and inside of our application file here, or whatever main file you're using, we're going to first create a new state variable called loading, because Firebase checks for authentication if it exists or not yet, but it doesn't happen right away. So even if you call the check right away, it's not going to finish before the page loads. So we're going to put a little check to see here. If we are loading, just return a React strap or bootstrap spinner. Then we're going to use what's called a use effect. And this is a lifecycle method with an empty dependency array that's called as soon as the application loads. We're going to call the auth component again, and we're going to check something called onAuth state changed. This is a function that's called, obviously, when an auth state is changed or when you first load your application. What you could do is you could pass in what's called the user prop right here, and you could check to see if it returns anything. So this is actually, you can actually call this in a new function and make it an async await with a try catch, or you can just call it here in the use effect the way I'm doing. So we're going to pass that user prop. We're going to check to say if there is a user and if there's not. So if there is a user, what we're going to do is we can actually just maybe go ahead and log that user just by saying user detected. And if there isn't a user, we could just say no user detected. And then after that if else statement, you can set your loading to false. That way the page is done loading and your application will know whether to keep it on the page it's at or just send it to the login page if we're not authenticated. So we're going to go ahead and start this up again. Let's make sure that your console is open. Now I'm going to refresh this because it's still stuck on my last render of login. But what should happen is if I refresh it, it should detect that I'm still logged in through Firebase and it should keep me on the main page. So I'm going to go ahead and just type in my main page at the top here. And you can see that it doesn't boot me out. It recognizes that even though I just came to the application for the first time, it saw that I have a user in my Firebase state. So it just redirected me to the main page. So that part is working properly. I'm going to go ahead and log out. And I'm going to go to my main page here. And you can see that no user was detected. So it redirected me to the login page. So now, anytime you're logged in or you're testing and you refresh, you shouldn't get booted to the login page unless that's the actual URL you're going to. So that's working properly. Now the next two pages we're going to work on are closely related. The first one is going to be if you forgot your password to send a link to your email address. And the second one is going to be confirming that link and creating a new password for yourself. So let's go ahead and get started. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to take our change password page and we're going to copy all of that and go to the forgot page. So as we've done with our previous pages, you're going to paste everything in and replace all occurrences of change password with forgot password or whatever you want to name this page. Next, I'm going to go ahead and change my changing to sending to more accurately represent what's going on here. Create another Boolean called sent with its own setter function, and I'm going to set this one to false as well. Instead of old, I'm going to have an email with set email, an empty string. I'm going to get rid of my confirm because that's all the variables we need. I don't need the history function here either. I'm going to get rid of everything inside this function. And I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the password auth provider check. I'm going to name this function reset password request. On the inside of it, I'm going to do my little error check here. See if there is an error message. Let's get rid of it because we're trying again. I'm going to set sending equal to true. Now I'm going to do an auth send password reset email, passing in the email you would like. I'm going to add a then block and catch block as we've been doing. For the then block, there's not any props, there's just a function. I'm going to log and just say the email has been sent. I'm going to set the sent to true, and I'm going to set the sending to false. In the catch block, I will have an error prop. I'm going to log that error. I can actually set the error to the error.message here, or you could have your own error text. It's totally up to you. And I'm going to set the sending to false here as well. Inside of my return, I'm going to create an auth container. I'm just going to get rid of everything that's already here and just start with an empty auth container. Send password reset. Inside of it, I'm going to check to see if we've sent or not. If we have, I'm just going to return a little paragraph that says a link has been sent to your email. And if it hasn't been sent, I'm going to go ahead and just paste back in a form group here. And instead of using a password type, it's going to be an email type. Right above it, I'm going to add some text just saying, please enter your email. I'm going to get rid of that autocomplete, change the types as I just mentioned, and make sure the variable matches up with my email variable value and setter. Last but not least, all we have to do is insert a React Strap button. Much like the other functions, it's going to be disabled if we're sending. Its color is going to be, we'll go with success for green. It's going to be a block button, and the on click is going to use the function we created earlier. I'm just going to put a little text here saying send reset link or send reset password email, whatever you want. I'm going to add my error text component that we created before, pass in our error. And I think that just about does it for the reset password page, or the forgot page, I should say. Now, one final thing we can actually do is we can go to the login page, and underneath the don't have an account text, you can add a link here for saying, hey, if you forgot your password, why don't you go to this forgot URL and send yourself an email. So that's what we're going to do here. I'm going to go ahead and add a new page, and the protected is going to be false on this one. We're going to call this one forgot password page, and again, make sure the protected is false. Now let's go ahead and start the server. And let's refresh, and you'll see forgot your password in the green text here. I'm going to click that, and I'm going to put in the email address. First, I'll put in a fake one just to show you that it's not going to work, saying that this email is not found or whatever the Firebase error is here. And then I can actually send myself the real email. And as we did in our Firebase console setup, it's going to send me an email with the proper link for my local host. So a link has been sent to your email with instructions. Perfect. So everything on this page is working just fine. Once you receive that password reset email, you're going to need a page that actually handles resetting the password. It's going to be similar to the change password page, but we're actually going to be using some different functions. So let's go ahead and we're going to copy everything out of our change password page again. And this time we're going to put it into the reset TSX file. Once again, rename the components properly. And then let's get into changing our state variables. So we're going to need some extra state variables because we're going to be processing some extra information. So the first variable we're going to have is called verifying. It's going to be a bool, and it's going to be equal to true. And then we're going to have a bool called verified, and that's going to be equal to false. We're going to need another state variable called OOB code, and that's going to be a string, also empty at the time. And how this page is going to work is first it's going to check to see if that OOB code that's being passed in via that link that you're sent into your email is valid. If it is valid, it'll allow you to reset your password. If it's not valid, then it's just going to not let you do anything. So what we're going to do is after you've confirmed that you have these 7 state variables, verifying, verified, changing, password confirm, OOB code, and error, you're going to go ahead and create a use effect after our history object. This use effect is going to be a lifecycle method, much like the one you saw earlier. As far as the dependency array is going to be empty too when we get to it. First, let's log, and we're going to say extracting code. And this code can be accessed using a library called query string. We're going to import that by importing query string from query string. This should be automatically included in your npm packages. I didn't have to install it, but you may have to. Next, you're going to let your string params be equal to the query string that we just imported, .parse. And we're going to be parsing our props. And we have to actually include our root component props here after our iPage props inside of our function component definition. And then we're going to get access to the props location search. That's where we're going to get it from. Then we're going to check to see if the string params is null or not. If the string params exist, let's try and parse that code out. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up our little block here, and we're going to have a new variable. We're going to say let OOB code be equal to string params dot OOB code, as you see here, and we're going to do it as string. We're going to say if this exists, we're going to log our info and say code found, and then we're going to call a function that verifies it in a moment. But let's finish up this block first. If no code exists, we're going to say, hey, there's no code here, or unable to parse code, whatever message you want. And then you're going to set your verified to false and your verifying to false. And you can go ahead and copy and paste that and put that in the last else block as well. Make sure that you have an empty dependency array, as we mentioned before. Now we could create that function that we're going to call. So let's create a new function called const verify password reset link. And in this, you're going to be passing in an OOB code of type string. You can put an underscore here if you want, just to differentiate your code from your state. You can go ahead and add the verify password link to the top here and pass in the code. Inside your function, you can go ahead and call auth.verify password reset code, pass in the code, and then you can do a then and catch block as well. This then block, you can parse the result if you would like. And what you're going to have here is you can just log it. I'm going to log the result. I'm going to set the OOB code to the OOB code. I'm going to set verifying to false and verified to true. And then I'm going to catch and set my errors in the catch block, like so. If this verify reset link function passes, you're going to be on the page where you're going to actually create the new password. So I'm going to change this just to password reset request. The password not equal confirm, we're going to leave that actually because we're going to want to make sure the passwords match. And all we're going to do is change the function that we call, and it's going to be confirm password reset, which needs an OOB code and the new password. You can then add your then and catch blocks. Then doesn't need any props, but you can have your catch block having your error prop. And much like you did before, you can log both your result and your error. Here we're going to log the error. You can set the error to the error.message if you would like. Set your changing to false. And here you could just do a history.push to the login page now that you have your new password. So let's get rid of that password provider statement. We don't need that anymore. We'll change the header of our auth container. Next, we're going to add a check to see if we're verifying or not. If we're verifying, let's just put the spinner in place until we verified our OOB code. I'm just using a React strap spinner here. You can just put text that says loading. Next, I'm going to add some React fragments, and then I'm going to check to see if we're verified or not. If we are verified, let's put in some text that says, please enter a strong password. And then we'll paste in the form groups that we just copied out. And actually inside this verified block, we have to add some more React fragments just so they're all in the same component. And that looks much better. We have our password and our confirmed password ready to go. We can copy and paste this button and put it after the form group. We can change the function that it calls to the password reset request. You could change the text to say whatever you want. I'm just going to say reset password. And then if we're not verified, you can just put some text here that just says invalid link or whatever error you want to catch if the OOB code is no good. I'm just going to go ahead and clean up this import here. And then lastly, go to your routes file and import this reset request as a non-protected page. So let's do that now. So now let's go ahead and start up our application again. And what I'm going to do actually is once I refresh it here is I'm going to go to the reset link at the top and let's see what happens. You're going to see that you get this invalid link error message that we put in before, and that's because I'm not passing in my OOB code. So in the Firebase console, what we can do is, as we mentioned in the introduction, is you can actually go to your templates and then go to your password reset. And there's a link at the bottom there. You can see mine's already set up for localhost 3000 with the reset page there. That's because I've already added it in, but you can make this match whatever page you're making this out to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my email because I already received the email to reset my password, and I'm going to paste it into the top of my URL, and we're going to see if it actually works and brings me to the page. So let's do that. And now you're going to see it says, please enter a strong password. So I'm going to go ahead and enter a new password. And just like that, it redirects me to the login page. So I'm going to try and log in with it. And the login is successful. So now we have all of our 6 pages complete. You can register, you can log in, you can log out, you can change your password, you can reset your password just in case you forgot your password. Now, as far as signing in goes, you'll remember in the beginning, one of the things we did was add a Google provider for a social media login. So what we're going to do is I'm going to create just a little module, a little promise function to help you out with social media login. And we're going to do the Google one together. And then after that, you should be able to add any social media login that you want. So let's go ahead and create a folder inside of our auth folder called modules. Inside of it, an index file, and let's create a promise function. So first, I'm going to import Firebase from Firebase. I'm going to do this because I need the types. Then I'm going to export const, and I'm going to make my function. I'm going to call it sign in with social media. I'm going to pass in a provider, and the provider is going to be of type firebase.auth.authProvider. And this function is simply going to be a new promise. And inside the chevrons, it's going to be a firebase.auth.userCredential. And inside of this, we're going to have a callback with resolve and reject. Inside of this, we're going to call our auth dot, and I believe it's sign in with pop-up, which refers to the social medias. And inside of that, we're going to be passing in our provider. We're going to have a then block and a catch block. You can go ahead and put resolve the result for the result block, and then the catch error is going to reject the error. And just like that, the promise function is done. Inside of our login function, I'm going to create a function called sign in with social media with a small s to differentiate. I'm also going to be passing in a provider here as well. And it's going to be of type firebase.auth.provider. So we're going to have to import the Firebase from Firebase at the top. Once you've defined the provider type, you can go ahead and create the function. And inside the function, we're going to be using that promise we just created. Before we do that, we can add our error and set authenticating here as well. So let's go ahead and import the sign in with social media, add a then and catch block as well. Inside the then block, we're going to just copy and paste from the then block above, as well as the catch block from the other authentication function as well. And for the set error, we can just go ahead and pass in the error message. And we can replace the one at the top too, because it just gives us more details. Now we can add a button for logging in with Google, because Google is the provider we're going to be using as an example. So let's go ahead and just put in a little separator here with the HR component. After that, we're going to have a button. And inside this button, we're going to do a few things. It's going to be disabled if we're authenticating. It's going to be a block. For the on click, we're going to be calling the function sign in with social media inside of this function component, and we're going to pass in the providers.google. I'm going to copy and paste the style from a project I already have. This should be the Google color button. Inside of this button, since I already have Font Awesome imported in my HTML in my base project, I don't have to do anything. I can just go ahead and copy and paste my Font Awesome from the website and just add sign in with Google. If you don't have Font Awesome imported, just make sure you're using a CDN and import it into the HTML file inside of your public folder. So let's go ahead and start the server, and we're going to go to our login page. And that is not the Google color, that is the Twitter color. So I'm going to have to go back and actually change those colors first. And now that I've done that, let's bring up the page, and that looks much better. So you can see that we have no user detected in the console. So I'm going to click sign in with Google, and we're going to see what happens. So I click it, and a pop-up opened on my second screen, but it didn't actually ask me to select a user. It actually already had one signed in a different application in Google. So it just signed in automatically. So if you're already logged into, let's say, YouTube or Gmail with one of your Google accounts, or you have one set automatically in your browser, it's just going to pick that one automatically up for you. If you don't want that to be the case, you should probably just clear out your cache and then restart your browser, and that will go away. So that concludes today's video. We've learned how to basically handle everything that you would need to with someone signing up with an email and password. You get to take advantage of a couple cool Firebase functions, and you get to see how signing in with the social media works. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you'd like to see more stuff with Firebase, please comment below, like and subscribe if you haven't already. I appreciate you guys, and we'll see you in the next one.